Wow, the lighting today is surprisingly appropriate for today's theme, which was Facebook's darkest week. So in case you didn't know, earlier this month, Facebook had a brutal week. Like a really bad week. I would probably even classify this as bad, maybe even worse than the whole Cambridge Analytica scandal that happened a few years ago. Granted, the events that happened this time are only as bad as they are because of their bad reputation. Wow, the lighting is... what the heck? So yeah, it didn't help that they already had a bad reputation. But you may be wondering, what made this particular week really bad? Good question. Three main things occurred. Firstly, a whistleblower came out to expose Facebook. Secondly, the data of 1.5 billion people got leaked. Well, kind of. I'll explain. And lastly, Facebook crashed for a couple hours, which a lot of you probably know about. And just to give you an idea of how crazy all this was, each of those three events are largely unrelated to each other. And what happened this week may change the way Facebook is run in the future. So let's get into the details. So firstly, Facebook just got exposed and called out by one of their former employees, Frances Haugen. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Basically, what she did was she revealed internal documents that show that Facebook prioritized profits over society's safety. Now that doesn't sound like that much to begin with, but just wait for it. So she left Facebook in May of 2021, which is just a few months ago, before making these claims. What she did was she partnered with the Wall Street Journal in order to investigate those internal documents, dubbed the Facebook files. These investigations were rolled out by the Wall Street Journal in September, and it revealed that Facebook is aware that their algorithms have major consequences towards people's mental health. And what's worse is that they're choosing not to do anything about it. That was the main crux of this whole report. And part of her whistleblower complaints to the SEC also cited how Facebook algorithms are also dividing communities by promoting things like ethnic violence, to which Facebook still chooses to do nothing about. Like, isn't that insane? Like, theoretically, this has always been possible. You know, because there's been a lot of studies that show that these algorithms fit people into these filter bubbles and yada yada. But to see the extent of it and to see that Facebook has done internal research regarding this and still is choosing not to do much about it is really hurting their image. So when Frances Haugen finally revealed her identity in a 60 Minutes interview on the 3rd of October and testified in front of the US Congress on the 5th of October, that's when things started to become really spicy. But the timing of these dates is especially unfortunate for Facebook, especially when you consider what happened between those two dates of the 3rd and the 5th of October. Because on the 4th of October was when the big leak and the big Facebook crash occurred. So let's talk about the leak. Now, leak may not be the best word for it, but basically, according to reports, the data of over 1.5 billion Facebook users were revealed to be on sale on hacker forums online. And this story broke out on the 4th of October. Now, when you look into it a bit more, this is not the worst thing in the world, don't quote me on that, because it's not passwords that were leaked, but rather public information that users openly give out, such as their full names, birthdays, and possibly even email addresses. So it's nothing you can't really already find, but this information is being sold in bulk to hackers who can use this information to send out things like phishing emails or targeted scams, you know, stuff like that. And apparently this is also totally unrelated to that Facebook crash that happened on that same day. So I guess this is a good reminder for us to set up two-factor authentication and set all of our personal information to private. Now lastly, most people would probably already be aware with the big Facebook crash that happened. Now although this occurred during the same time the data leak happened, these are two unrelated events, but it's really bad timing, as I said earlier. So basically what happened was that Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp all crashed for about like 6 hours or so, which is apparently Facebook's longest crash in over a decade. I remember during this time I was trying to check both WhatsApp and Instagram a couple times during that period, forgetting that Instagram and WhatsApp were down. Like, I'd be checking every few minutes at one point, forgetting each time that they were down. And in case you're confused as to why I'm bundling Instagram and WhatsApp into all this, it's because Facebook owns both of those platforms, which is important for a point that I'm going to bring up soon. So as with any time the platforms of a big company like Facebook or Google go down, people resort to Twitter just to make sure that those platforms are down for other people too, rather than just themselves. And what's funny is that it's always Twitter that people resort to, since they're comparatively much smaller than Facebook and Google, making them less likely to be looped into a major crash like this. And what's even funnier is that Twitter's social media guide caught wind of the sudden increase of traffic that had all of a sudden been poured into Twitter, that they straight up tweeted, "Hello literally everyone." You know, because everyone was on Twitter asking where Facebook is. Usually I find brands tweeting like normal people like this cringe, but this one was pretty good, I'll admit. Anyways, Facebook's PR teams went into full damage control during the crash to reassure everyone that they're gonna get their platforms back up as soon as possible. And they even sent out a final sorry message once they were back on. But I want to focus on this sorry message for a second. It brings up an important point on the future of Facebook. Now the message reads, "To the huge community of people and businesses around the world who depend on us, we're sorry. Blah blah blah. Thank you for bearing with us." The part where they address their audience as the huge community of people and businesses who depend on us is surprisingly honest. Like, I'm surprised they even said that. Because while from a PR standpoint, it was a good move to directly address and apologize to those who relied on them, referring them to the huge community just shows how much of the world genuinely relies on Facebook services, including Instagram and WhatsApp, to keep their livelihoods running, which has been a major point that's been used against them during their antitrust lawsuit. This crash is only evidence of what a social media monopoly can do to destabilize the world, which is bad news for Facebook and their antitrust lawsuit. So with all these three events happening at the same time, the US and the EU may start hampering down on Facebook, as the case for a company breakup is starting to become more realistic and substantiated. We might soon see a future where Instagram and WhatsApp are independent companies once again, and it may have trickle-down effects towards other huge companies such as Google. So we'll just have to wait and see what comes from Facebook's worst week. Now also, at the time of recording this, apparently Facebook is planning on changing their parent company name tomorrow at Facebook Connect. So I don't know if that's gonna work in helping fix their image, but that is probably a move to help fix their image. That's all I gotta say.